So boom, this is the cylinder head that I sent you. That's the 4-valve cylinder head. So first things first, right here, these two bolts, boom and boom, they're too far apart. The Groms is like right here and right here. These are too far apart. So you weld metal, you add aluminum, and then you re-drill the hole. You just weld a bunch of material right there and right there. You line it up and you re-drill the holes. You get the head gasket to line everything up so that you can re-drill the holes. And here you could see the actual valves, 1 valve, 2 valve, and on the other side, there's another set the same way. This is the intake side, this is the exhaust side, that makes it a 4-valve. This here is what I'm talking about when I say the back of the cam. So there's the spark plug hole. The back of the camshaft sits right here. And if you look at here, this cast part where the stud is, you notice how this side don't got this part of metal? That's a channel. That's a tunnel right here. And you see the temp sensor? Here, let me move this. This temp sensor, when they casted the cylinder head, they drilled straight through. Boom, 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 right to the back of that camshaft. That's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make one of these. We just gotta make a little channel here. We weld material. You could weld material onto here, right there. You're gonna weld a little bit of material here, and you're gonna drill straight through. Boom. Just like that. Exactly like that. Just like how they made it. This is casted material. They put a drill straight through and led it to the back of that camshaft. That gives the cylinder head oil. That's how the cylinder head gets oil. You can see here the temp sensor. You could put a banjo bolt and route an oil line to that temp sensor, and you won't have to worry too much about that, but you'll have to worry about where you're getting the oil from to that bolt, that sensor port. This is when you're looking at the front wheel. From the front wheel, this is the top left, this is the bottom left. This is where the oil comes from originally on the Honda Grom. We weld material right here, and you drill straight through so that you can get an oil port, and then you just weld that shut right here so you don't have to, leak all your oil out, of course. But that's what I mean when I say you go to the back of the cam. You can see it a little better here. This piece of metal, this little chunk of casting metal, it's inside the cylinder head. It's part of the cylinder head. That's hollow. That goes straight through here. If you look in through the cylinder stud, right down in through here, you'll see the hole right here. And if you take this out, take the temp sensor out, you pull out that temp sensor, you block the hole on the back side, you block this hole right here, bottom left head stud opposite from the cam chain channel. This is the cam chain channel. You block that hole with one finger, you come back up here, and then you block this part right here, and you put your mouth on there and you blow into it, and you'll feel the air coming out from the other side, from the cam channel. You'll feel the air coming out from in here, because that's where the oil goes through. So first things first, you weld material here and here. You get those holes closer together. I actually have the cylinder head underneath me, under my bed, so I can show you it in a second. You come on over here to the back of the cam channel, or the back of the camshaft. You emulate this on this side. You put a hole, you put material here, weld a bunch of material in here. You drill a hole straight through it from this side, and then you plug this over here so that it doesn't leak all your oil out. That'll make it so that when this head stud fills up, travels through that hole straight to the back of that camshaft, you don't have to do nothing else to nothing. Then you come over here to the cam channel. So this is the cam channel, like I mentioned. This area here, my fault, I'm looking at the screen. This area here, and the same on the other side, it's too wide apart. So it doesn't meet the gasket. The gasket goes around here. You want to weld about the same thickness as it already has. You want to beep, beep, and just weld material onto there, surface it nice and flat, and then you do the same thing on that side too. You weld some more material right here, you give it an extra lip, and then you sand it down nice and flush so that everything is nice and flush. That'll seal against your cylinder head gasket. As it sits like this, if you were to do everything else and then put it on and forget about that, all the oil will leak through here onto the ground because it shows. You'll see this when you put this cylinder head. So you just gotta weld a little bit of material right here so that it seals against the cylinder head gasket. And that'll give you a little 4-valve. And just looking at this, that design, having the spark plug straight in the middle, having the 4 valves, this is race platform. This is like a race head. Yamaha is known for being more performance based than any other brand, but this is a performance type of head. The performance kind of configuration. You want the spark plug in any engine to be right in the middle so that you get a even and centered flame front. That makes it so that it explodes nice and evenly, and all the pressure exerts on every side evenly. Other than that, that's it. So the head studs are these 4 holes. Those 4 holes, instead of, when you take the nuts off, you'll be left with a stud. You grab vice grips and you grip onto the head stud, or you get 2 nuts. You could put 2 locking nuts on the top of the head stud. When you pull off the entire cylinder head, you get 2 nuts on each head stud, and you crack it down from the bottom head stud. The second head, the first one that you put on, and then the second one locks it in place. The first one you put on, you'll use for leverage with a wrench, and you'll break off the cylinder, the head stud. You could unscrew them out. They're in there tight, so you use a head. You could use the 2 nuts, or you use a pair of vice grips, and you clamp down on the nut or on the stud itself, and you just turn it out. Lefty loosey, righty tighty. They're big ass bolts basically. They're just big ass bolts without a bolt head. You grab it with on the shaft itself, you grab it with the vice grips, and you just turn it off. You turn it out. You pull those off. You get the Zuma head studs from Partzilla, and those are a little longer. This cylinder head, when it sits on the ground, when it's sitting like this, it's taller. It's literally taller than the original cylinder head. So you just got to get longer head studs. You get a longer cam chain, and then the hole here. Where is it? This here is actually where your cam gear goes. This is the camshaft. This is where the cam gear goes. You see that little notch right here at the bottom? That little notch, can I zoom in? Yeah, I can actually. So that little notch right there, that's where the Tang goes. That's where that little tab on the cam gear goes. You want to weld that tab and give it extra material on the cam gear. Don't weld it to this, but you're gonna weld material to that tab so that it doesn't break off, or it doesn't have the chance to break off, because this here adds 2 extra valve springs, which makes it's harder to turn. So that could break off that little ting, because that little ting was designed for a 2-valve. It wasn't designed for a 4-valve. So you get the hole on the cam gear. Let me show you what a cam gear looks like. You get the hole on a cam gear, and you make it a little bigger. Cam gear. Let's see what comes up. So there's a camshaft. There's the camshaft cover, the cam gear cover. Let me see, anything? Well, I guess not. Alright, so let's see. Well, I don't know that there's actually a picture on Partzilla, but I guess we can try to find one real quick. Alright, so boom. I don't know that there's a picture, but I'll show you off the diagram. So, right here, you can see that little Tang. That little piece of metal that sticks out, that goes inside that notch on that camshaft. This notch right here. That little notch with the gear, you see that little Tang? That goes inside the notch. You weld the sides right here. You see that gap? You weld these 2 sides together so that it's nice and sturdy, that little Tang. Give that Tang some reinforcement, because it will break. They're known to break. But that hole in the center for the cam gear, make it a little bigger. That's all you gotta do. Let me see if they showed me a picture. Yes, perfect. So here, you see that Tang? And this little thing right here, you add material going to like 3/4 of the way up, because it doesn't go all the way into that notch. This thing sticks out farther than what it actually has to. Not really, but you weld material here, leave about that much sticking out, somewhere around like that much, and that'll reinforce this Tang and keep it from breaking off. You want that. You don't want to, you can't buy a Zuma cam gear and use it on the Zuma cam gear, because like I said, there's a 2-to-1 relationship between the cam and the camshaft. This is part of the camshaft. This has 32 teeth on it. Yeah, it doesn't say here. Well, it might actually say. But there's 32 teeth on this gear. You cannot change that. If you change that, you're going to change how many times this spins relative to the crankshaft, and it'll eventually hit the valves. The piston will hit the valves. You cannot change that. The engine won't run even if you do change it. So you make this hole in the middle, make that hole a little bit bigger so that it'll fit on that. And you weld that tang so that that tang is strong. Then you get the head studs, a little bit bigger head studs. I don't think the head studs are demonstrated in this, but you will see where the head studs go. So right here, this is the case half. You see that? That's the cam chain channel on the engine. That's on the actual engine itself. See the rest of the engine? So the engine itself, these holes, these 2 big ones, you see that, how they're holes and not studs? It's because you could pull those head studs off and you make it fit. You get the Zuma head studs and you thread those right in. Let me see if maybe I could pull a picture crankcase. Let's see. See here? Those are the head studs. Those 4 long rods. You can replace those with Zuma head studs. That'll go right in. They're the same threading. You just thread it right in. It's a direct swap. Those are a little longer. Now that chain that you've seen also with the cam gear. Where is it here? This chain has to be a little longer as well. You get a little longer, about like 2 links longer, so that it'll fit, because that cylinder head's too big. This is a, so yeah, you could see the sprocket here. Sprocket count is a 32 tooth. The cam chain, yes. So I believe the cam chain to be a 90 link. This is like 88 link. See the cam chain number 2? That's 88 LE, and that's a 25 HD. That's the type of chain. So you know you got a 420 chain on the rear for the motorcycle, for the actual motorcycle chain. The drive chain is at 420. You know, big bikes are 520. That's a 25 HD. That's the type of chain that I use. It's a 25 heavy duty. That's what the HD stands for. 88 LE is 88 links. You want 90 link. So the Zuma Cam, well, I'm not gonna look that up right now, but the Zuma, I believe, is a 90 link. You just go, and instead of buying one for the Honda, this one's what, $6, $6.97, you buy one for the Zuma. The same thing with the head studs. That'll be that. And then open up that hole. And what I mean when I say mill a channel, you can on the cylinder. This is the cylinder head. On the cylinder, you go to the back side right here on the cylinder, on the back of the cylinder, where the base gasket goes, where the cylinder meets the engine, not where the cylinder meets the cylinder head. On the back side of the cylinder, you go from the bottom left and you mill into the material to the top left. You literally score a channel, a tunnel, going from the bottom left to the top left. You don't want to do that on the cylinder head because you'll lose compression. You don't want to do it in general. It's a way to do it. It's a way that I did it. I did it the first time, and that's how it worked. And then Ken told me about welding material to the back of the cam itself right here. And he said, if you just replicate this on this side, you weld material right there, and then you drill a hole straight through. It makes it bolt-in. It makes it so that all the work is on that. And you don't have to go buying another cylinder jug and putting more work into it if you blow it up, because you will blow it up. I'm just gonna say that now. If you're gonna tinker on shit, you're gonna run it to the ground. The thing is fun. I've blown mine up before 10,000 miles. At 7,000 miles, I blew my shit up. But that was because of other situation. I could get into that fucking shit, but that you shouldn't have to worry about that. I will say, this tensioner, this here, this is one of the first upgrades you want to do when you get into a camshaft. If you're gonna do a camshaft, you got to do this. So you see number 3 here. Number 3 is a poorly designed part. They just not the greatest design. If you look at number 10 over here, that also is a poorly designed part. They work. It works. It was just meant to work. Let me see if this comes with a picture. Yes. Okay, so this is a cam chain tensioner. See that little rubber wheel? A tiny little rubber wheel will not keep up with the chain when you put a cam, because the cam opens valves more, which puts more tension on the chain, which puts more tension on that. And you see how flimsy it is, and cheap little stamped metal. Well, that little wheel has a tendency to disintegrate because it's rubber. It's not the strongest of rubber at that. It's relatively soft. This little wheel has a tendency of disintegrating. Your chain will saw through the half of that shit. Eventually, it'll literally chainsaw through that shit. So you get an aftermarket one. Let me pull it up real quick. So you grab one of these. This is a speed shop tensioner. So you see how instead of the little cheap dinky stamped metal with a rubber wheel, you upgrade to a nice piece of metal with a bearing. This is a metal wheel with a bearing in it. And you also get that bottom one replaced. The number 3, I think it was. No, the number 10. This little wheel. That's the same wheel that's on that, on the top of that one. Little rubber bullshit. And that actually rides as a bushing on this bolt. So you see how it's like a shoulder bolt? This piece of material right here sits in the middle of that, and that's the journal. That's the bearing. That bolt and that wheel act as a journal bearing. And I wouldn't trust, I mean, the bigger problem is this thing, because it will disintegrate, but that's also a problem a little later in time. It lasts a little longer, just a little bit, a tiny bit. Anyway, this shit here, you replace that with this. It's 140 bucks. Shit get a little expensive, just a little bit, but this worth it, because this is non-consumable. These two bitches, these are consumable. In other words, you will consume it. The engine will eat it. It will consume it in regular usage even. You replace these, you have to keep an eye on those. Those are consumable of the engine. The timing chain, every 10,000 miles, get a new one. You don't really have to worry too much about that, but every 10,000 miles, get a new one. And then here, buy one of these, forget it. You don't ever have to set it again. This is, they're like I said, they're bearings. They're actual ball bearings with a metal sprocket. It's not gonna wear. They don't wear. This is the ultimate replacement. It's the best of the best. Don't buy shit else. I don't care what you find, because it's $140. You go on Google and you find any other tensioner. That's the cam chain tensioner, by the way. You go on Google and look for any other tensioner, they're gonna run you about the same. The Koso tensioner here, this bitch here, that little gear, the small gear, that will grind through the bolt. They made it out of too hard of a metal, and it will literally grind through the bolt. It'll chainsaw through the bolt, and it'll chainsaw into the case half. That's the case half. And if you grind through it, if you look here, that line right here, that's where that gear goes. And it'll grind through the bottom, and you'll put a hole through that shit, and you'll lose all your oil. You'll blow your engine up. It's known. It's a known issue with those. So don't buy those, because you see how much they're asking, right? You see how much this one costs? Just buy this one. This replaces everything. It's a one and done shop, one and done deal. You don't have to worry about shit else. It's the best tensioner on the market. Buy one of these. Don't get anything else. Those other shits, and trust me, ask me how I know. I have this. That's the one I'm using. The top one is fine. The top arm is fine. That doesn't give issue. That little wheel is the biggest problem ever. I got a hole. I almost got a hole. I saved it in time, but I almost put a hole in my shit because of that fucking thing. You'll have to put JB weld or have somebody weld it shut after, and that's just a bitch to do, because it's a very tight close. It's very close. This gear, when you look at it relative to where it sits here, it's really, really close to the case. So it really doesn't have to grind down too much to touch the case and start putting a hole in your shit. So you don't want to end up having to get a welder on there, because it's gonna put a even tighter gap between the wheel and the case half because of the weld, and you'll fuck the shit up. So just get one of the speed shop tensioners. You'll never go back. And now the other thing that I say to get is a manual tensioner. Let's see if it pulls up. No. Okay, so here. We'll go with this. So I have a Deca, look at that, it's the first one. I have a Deca Performance. This is what I have on my shit. 60 bucks. Manual tensioner. So remember how I said you got two drain bolts underneath? You got a 17 millimeter and a 14 millimeter. If you pull the 14 millimeter, a spring will fall out. You got to put it back together. That's what falls out. Basically you get, let me see if it shows it here. Zoom out. Yes, it does. Perfect. So here, there's that 14 mil bolt. Can I zoom in, please? Oh, God. Fucking zoom in. Anyway. There's that 14 mil bolt, number 12. Number 17 is the copper washer that goes with it. As soon as you pull that out, number 5, the big old spring, drops right out. That drops out, and then following after a couple of seconds, if you let it sit there, this will fall out. And this is the push rod. So what this is the push rod tensioner, I guess. Let me tell you the actual name. Number 6. So yeah, actually that's the tensioner push rod. You can see it right there. Tensioner push rod. So that, what that does is when it fills up with oil in the crankcase down here, right around in here, it fills up with oil on the bottom of that push rod, wherever it is, somewhere over there. That push rod will fill up. The spring is basically a minimum tension, and when it fills up with oil, it creates harder tension. That little spring, not that there's anything wrong with the push rod. What it does is eventually at higher RPM with an aftermarket pump, you could put too much pressure in there because of the aftermarket pump and higher RPMs. High RPMs delivers more oil than low RPMs, which is also another issue with this thing, low RPM. But high RPM will put too much oil pressure in there, and it'll put too much pressure down on this tensioner arm. And that'll push down on the chain too hard, wearing out this wheel prematurely. If you get a camshaft for one, and you ride at higher RPM, or if you go at low RPM. Low RPM doesn't damage this, but what it does do is it puts too little pressure on this here, and it'll allow this to flex, to actuate and turn too much. So if it gets too low RPM, the back arm, the back side of this little corner right here, let's get out of this here. The little corner will actually grind into the transmission. The corner of this piece right here. The transmission gears are right next to it, and they slide in and out. Second gear specifically will grind into there if there's too low RPM. So if you're cruising in second gear at 3,000 RPM and you start hearing a little grind sound, best believe is that getting chewed up. I could show you the original, my original. And mind you, I'm not doing stupid shit to my shit. I'm doing well-known, well-thought-out information. I just thought I could get away with it a little differently, so I did shit a little ignorantly, and I ended up costing myself shit. Because I left it alone, and I put a cam in it, and I rode around at 3,000 RPM thinking, I'll hear that shit if it grinds. And I didn't hear it. At least not for a little bit, until it got really bad, and it started leaving metal chunks in my shit. So you want to replace this with the speed shop tensioner, and you want to replace the push rod with one of these. This makes it so that it's manual. What that means is this whole setup right here with the push rod and the tensioner arm, it does not have any dynamic into it anymore. You set the arm at a certain distance away from here, and that'll let it flex ever so much, but there's no longer going to be any forces pushing, because this pushes on it with the oil pressure and with the spring. With having this in there, there is no spring. There is no oil pressure. It is a manual push rod. The rod itself will extend and retract. You see that little notch at the end of it with a little screwdriver. The little notch at the end of that, put a screwdriver in there, and you thread it into the bolt, into here. So you put this where the 14 millimeter bolt goes, and then you put this into that. And that will let you thread that in and out, because the inside of this is threaded. That threads into this. It's like a big old screw and a nut. And you put that in there and you screw it in. That'll give you a manual tensioner. That'll allow you to control how much tension this puts on the chain, which will save you from damaging either this or your second gear or even the push rod, because the push rod will get grounded down too. That push rod here, this push rod and that little button, number 7, that button pushes on the back of this arm right here. It pushes on there. And the gear grinds at that. So when it grinds at that, it'll start to grind right on that button. And it'll start to grind into there too. You just replace all that. You get one of these, 60 bucks. So you spend $200, $60 on this, $140 on the tensioner. Your timing tensioner will be bulletproof. It'll literally never need to be replaced. Nothing will ever happen to it. That is the optimal setup to have for your timing tensioner. You get the Speed Shop tensioner, and then you get the Deca Performance manual tensioner. So the Speed Shop tensioner arm, or just tensioner, and then you get the manual tensioner rod. That literally makes it so that you can live at 12,000 RPM. These things redline at 9,500 RPM. Yes, the crankshafts will do to 12,000 RPM. Not very happily. You have to really mod your shit. We're not going to worry about doing that. I haven't even upgraded or I haven't fucked with my RPM limit because these fucking things, they scream already as it is. I don't want to push this thing any farther. It's at 9,500 RPM all day. To put it any higher is to wear through shit faster. I don't want to do that. I'll gear my shit for extra speed. That's why I got a 1634 instead of the stock 1534, because I want my shit to go faster without having to make it work harder. I mean, it does have to work a little harder because it needs a little more power. Whenever you gear up for speed, you need to have the power behind that to get to that speed. But if you gear down for torque, you lose speed, but you enjoy a little more acceleration. So there's a trade-off. I don't want to trade much. I want both speed and power. So I went with a 16 tooth and I gave it a cam to push it so that it could actually use that 16 tooth. This will give it even more because it's flowing more air. These are air compressors. That's all they is. Quite literally, when you look at the valves, your combustion chamber here, the air goes in from one side, mixes in with fuel, explodes, and then it flies out the other side. That's all this thing does. Sucks in, the piston comes down, one of those valves, or both of those valves, one side of those valves open, air comes in, piston comes back up, valves close, explodes, and then the other valves open, and it pushes it all out at 1,500 times a minute. That's idle. So 9,500 times, that's doing it 100 times a second. The piston comes up, down, 100 times a second, because it has to come up, down, twice to complete a 4-stroke cycle. For every stroke is a stroke of the paintbrush. Stroke, 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 stroke. That's a stroke in a 4-stroke engine. So the piston, when it comes down, that's 1 stroke. When it comes back up, that's another stroke. It needs to stroke 4 times to get through 1 cycle. A 2-stroke cuts that in half. A 2-stroke has to go up and down once. Every time it goes up and down, that's 1 cycle. So if it strokes 1, strokes down, that's a power cycle. Then it goes back up. Stroke 1, stroke down, that's another power cycle. That's on a 2-stroke. A 4-stroke, stroke 1, stroke down, stroke 1, stroke down, that's a power cycle. Then it does that again. Stroke 1, stroke down, stroke 1, stroke down, that's a power cycle. That's why 2-strokes are stronger and faster, but they still produce the same amount of power per cycle. It's just that it's doing it in half the time. So that's why it's faster and stronger. But they're not really. That's why they've gone extinct. Other than that, bro, that's all the 4-stroke engine is. That's all an engine is in general. Doesn't matter whether it's a Grom or a Zuma. All engines do the same. That's why you can do such a thing like this, because you're taking a Zuma head, a Yamaha, and putting it on a Honda. That's more than enough to show that they all do the same thing, bro. So like I said, we're gonna revert real quick. You weld these two a little closer together. You weld a little more of a lip there so that it meets the gasket on the cylinder. You come on over to here, you weld material here. You're gonna basically do what that temp sensor port is. You can literally see the channel here. It goes straight down to the back of that cam. You do the same thing on this side because that's where the oil comes from. You get longer head studs so that you could put a nut on these, because the head stud will sit right at the edge. It'll be flush with the cylinder head. You won't be able to put a nut on. So you get the Zuma head studs, you get the Zuma cam chain, You open up the cam gear so that it'll fit on there, and you weld material here and here and re-drill these holes so that you can push them closer together. That's it. That's literally it. That's all you got to do. You get a 4-valve for 125 at you. This is a 4-valve, and fun fact, this is a 4-valve for a 125 as it is. The Yamaha Zuma is faster than the Grom because of that. Because of this shit right here. It uses the same bore, same stroke size, everything's the same on that end. Literally, it's a 52.4 millimeter bore on the Yamaha Zuma, and it's a 57.9 millimeter stroke. Same exact dimension as the Grom. That's why this works. If it was any different, I mean, it shouldn't do too much because that's on the cylinder heads, on the cylinder side below this, so it shouldn't make too much of a difference anyways. It's just that this works perfectly because it's literally damn near the same dimension. It's virtually like the same engine, kind of, almost, not really. That this one is off a scooter engine. It uses a CVT transmission, no clutch, no gears, but the crankshaft and the engine itself, mind you, let me see, this is the engine. This portion of the case half upwards, that's the engine side. From here up, from back here, that's the transmission. So there's nothing to do with the engine over in this side. The engine is all from here up. They're virtually the same engine. One uses a 4-valve, the other one uses a 2-valve, and it has the 4-valve. The Yamaha has a little bit higher compression than this one. So this is at 160 psi. I don't know what the Zuma is in numbers, but I know that the Zuma is a 10-to-1 compression ratio versus the Grom's 9-to-1 compression ratio. So there's a little more compression. It's pushing, it's squeezing down the air a little more, but it doesn't mean that it's making more pressure. That's PSI, pounds per square inch. That's your PSI. The Grom's is 160. The Zuma could very much be 160 because of the volume inside of its combustion chamber at top dead center. So that it doesn't necessarily mean that because you have higher compression ratio that you have higher compression. It's just a compression ratio. So if I have 10 millimeter or 10 units of volume at bottom dead center, and I squeeze it down to 5 units, that's 2-to-1 compression. So if I got 10 units of volume here and I squeeze it down to 1 unit, that's a 9-to-1 or a 10-to-1, either a 9-to-1 or a 10-to-1. That doesn't mean that you're going to be at 160 psi because you did that. That's compression. So compression is different than compression ratio. Ratio is just the ratio. It doesn't actually tell you the compression. You want to go off of compression numbers. So if you want to get a faster motor, you raise your compression. You got 160, you go to 190. You could go up to like around 200, 210. My safest bet for me, for any gasoline engine, is 220. Anything higher than that and you're possibly running into knock, you might detonate. You're going to want to use a special gas. You're not going to want to just throw whatever gas into it. Anything after 200 degree or even anything at 190 and up, you're going to want to use premium. But other than that, that's all an engine is. 30 minutes, you get a full explanation of what to do to make a 4-valve out of a Honda with a fucking Yamaha Zuma. It's fucking crazy, but it works.